Welcome to Not Entirely Unlike Tea with Christine Collins. Hey there, it's Christine Collins, and today we are going to attempt to answer an interesting question around whether or not video games and similar types of tools and tasks help to prevent PTSD or post-traumatic stress disorder. The interesting thing about this is that our brains form memories in a very fascinating way that is tied to visuals. And to some extent, this is connected to how the practices of things like visualization can actually help us to pre-form memories, to pre-design experiences that we actually want to have. But today we're looking specifically around trauma and the way those memories form. So trauma gets encoded as fragmented sensory information, mostly visual snapshots along with physical sensations in the hippocampus and the amygdala, and they don't necessarily get integrated into our ordinary narrative memory system. They kind of float around as raw, unprocessed information, which is part of what contributes to intrusive flashbacks that are associated with PTSD. And it's almost like they just never got filed away or processed properly in the same way that other normal memories did. But when we do something to disrupt that pattern, particularly something that uses a lot of the visuospatial cortex, some of the impact of those traumatic memories being formed can be reduced. And it happens because there's a competition between what was experienced that was traumatic in the visuospatial memory, and it's competing against the new information that's coming in, such as the video game. So by engaging the visuospatial working memory, it kind of overloads the same brain channels that would otherwise be getting used to consolidate those traumatic visual memories. It's like if everything's trying to fit down the same road, there's not enough space for all of it to pass through. And something that is intensely visuospatial, requiring you to mentally rotate shapes and keep track of spatial relationships in your mind, you're kind of creating a traffic jam on that road that doesn't allow the other traumatic visual imagery to get through. It's an interruption of that memory encoding process. It's important that that interruption happens within about 6 hours. Once some time has passed, the memories have already been encoded, and then it won't have the same interrupting effect. So repetitive puzzle games, things that are highly visual spatial in nature, those are the types of things that can have this kind of an impact. And it's interesting because outside the context of this trauma memory processing, even in ordinary everyday life, playing repetitive puzzle games can actually help to calm some of our nervous system threat detection systems. And that might partially be how some of those games become almost like an addiction, because they have a soothing quality to them. The predictable patterns of the games calm the threat detection system. The amygdala, that's constantly scanning around for unpredictability, for danger, likes the clear rules and the predictable patterns that emerge from a game where it's pretty consistent as far as what you're expecting. There might be mild surprises, perhaps as you get to a new level or something like that, but ultimately the visual patterns are predictable, and that can feel reassuring. In the same way that reading the same book over and over or watching the same favorite movie over and over creates that reassurance for the amygdala, kind of calms it down because it doesn't need to keep seeking out unpredictable patterns or threats. It knows exactly what's coming next, and that can feel very soothing. There's also something to the rhythmic motor engagement. Tapping a controller or swiping a screen or tapping a screen creates some bilateral stimulation, similar to how EMDR works, whether it's through eye movements, tapping, or rhythmic hand movements. That can also help to regulate the autonomic nervous system and help with some of the emotional processing from the day. Also, it can induce a little bit of a flow state where you're very absorbed and focused and time can kind of disappear, which is not unusual that people will experience when playing games where just hours will pass and they didn't realize how much time was passing. The default mode network kind of quiets down. That's the part of us that tends to ruminate, the self-referential thinking, the thought patterns, the never-ending internal monologue. It kind of quiets down during those moments. And that network can keep us sometimes a little bit stuck in an anxiety loop and overthinking and ruminating. So that piece slows down when we have that absorbed focus state. And then there's also these little micro hits of dopamine every time there's an achievement, every time you finish a part of the game, or you move up a level, or you match 3 things that are similar. There's just enough reward to keep the executive function engaged without it becoming overwhelming. So it's interesting to me from an addiction standpoint because most addictions, at least initially, serve some kind of a purpose psychologically, and often that purpose is to soothe the nervous system or to soothe some aspect of our psychology in some way. Whether or not it's ideal or not doesn't necessarily impact whether it's effective. So long term, there can be consequences and unintended outcomes from getting an addiction to something like a video game or similar type of behavior. But we gravitate towards things that provide us with relief from some of that stress and anxiety and central nervous system activation. Of course, there are other tools and practices and processes that can do that as well without necessarily becoming as addictive. But I think it's interesting to kind of take this apart and dissect it and look at how and why some of the mechanisms happen and what purpose they serve. Because once we better understand what's really going on for us from a neuroscientific perspective, we have a little bit more power and control over the decisions that we make. So there are some benefits and there are also potential downsides if something is getting overused or is being overdone or is interfering with other parts of life and stopping you from getting to other goals and tasks and things that are really important. But it's helpful to understand that some of these tools do offer a little bit of relief from different types of stress that we may experience. And if you are looking to have a bigger reservoir of tools available to you, some of the other tools that I'm familiar with that are very good for managing stress and anxiety and even processing trauma are things like EFT tapping, which works in a little bit different way. And I have other podcasts that cover why and how that's so beneficial in terms of mental processing. And it is very soothing to the nervous system as well, without having some of those downsides of being potentially addictive. And it can be done easily on your own for free without any external tools and without taking a lot of time or necessarily needing to have a lot of insight to do a round or two of some quick tapping. So that's one of the reasons why it's among my favorite tools, especially in the moment where stress levels feel high. It's a fantastic way to unwind at the end of a day. I do always recommend considering working with a practitioner live one-on-one, but if you have a little bit of experience in tapping and you would just like to have some additional layers of support around that, I do offer a mindset membership that contains tools like EFT tapping videos, as well as hypnosis audios that you can use and listen to that also help you to unwind, to relax, and to process whatever things may be happening for you. And all of these are available at a very low monthly cost, and that information is all in the show notes that you can check out at any time. And I hope you found this to be helpful and interesting, and until the next time we connect, I wish you the most magical and creative rest of your day. Thanks for listening. This is Christine Collins at transformcreate.com.